Brilliant. Anyway, so look, the presentation I've got for you this evening will take about 40 minutes, and it'll leave us about 20 minutes for a Q&A session at the other end. So hopefully you will have some questions. So do ask questions. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm absolutely passionate about the responsibility that we have as designers to shape the built environment in such a way that it not only positively impacts on our health and being, but that it doesn't harm us either. And you got to think, you know, over the last 100 years or so that we've been living and working under artificial light in sparse concrete boxes, overlooking other concrete boxes. And this is far removed from what we relied upon to sustain us as Homo sapiens for 200,000 years. And so it's apparent today that our health and well-being has suffered as a result. So I'm going to start with a question as to, you know, why should we consider designing healthy spaces? Excuse me. So lifestyle factors such as inactivity, poor diet, chronic sleep deprivation, stress, toxins in the environment such as known endocrine disruptors, carcinogens, these are all heavily impacted in the onset of obesity, heart and lung disease, cancers, diabetes, respiratory illnesses like asthma, infertility, preterm babies, and autoimmune conditions. And this is why we should be designing healthy spaces, because we can be part of the solution. Interior design and architecture have evolved as evidence-based, human-centric professions, and we're at the intersection of health, science, and technology. And we have measurable design tools at our disposal, supported by a body of evidence that we know positively impact on our health and well-being. So we're going to look at one of the toolkits, one of the design toolkits that we can use, and that's today, and that is biophilic design. So what is it? What's biophilic design? It aims at creating a connection with nature in our man-made environments, and it has proven benefits, including reduced anxiety, increased productivity, strengthened immune system, improved cognitive performance, and so on. And we spend 90% of our lives indoors, cut off from the natural systems we evolved from, as I mentioned earlier on. And so it's no surprise that the primitive parts of our brain crave this reconnection with nature. However, it's much more than just bringing the outside in. It's not about putting potted plants in a corner. Biophilic design is all about nature in all of its guises. It includes natural light. It includes views on nature, plants, natural materials, textures, complexity, and patterns. And while biophilic design is, you know, it's a really hot trend at the moment, it's not new. So tomb paintings in ancient Egypt and remains found in Pompeii substantiate that people brought plants into their homes. The religious order, the Knights of Malta, who were famous for their hospitals, believed that gardens were essential support for healing. And they were way ahead of their time. In fact, in their hospital in Valletta, built in 1530, each bed was designed to face a window overlooking the gardens below, which were scented with orange blossom. And so, whilst biophilic design has been around for a long time, we've only recently been able to measure its impact on human health and performance. So I'm going to kill you all now with PowerPoint with the evidence and by some of the studies that have been done on biophilic design. So you can screenshot this. I just wanted you to have it all in one page. So I suppose the seminal study was Roger Ulrich's study in 1984. And what he did was he noticed the patients who had their gallbladders removed in hospital, that one lot who had a view to the exterior were actually recovering faster, leaving hospital earlier, and needed less pain meds than the guys across the corridor who were looking at a concrete wall. And so he ran a study in this hospital for 9 years, and the results were consistent. That study has been replicated about 50 times ever since and supports his early findings. Now, you will see there's numerous studies, there's buckets of information on biophilic design and its impact. And in the commercial world, it's where it actually has been most popularized because, you know, it has an impact on the bottom line of businesses, which is how people perform in the spaces they're provided. And they've looked at subjects looking out at a green roof. They demonstrated higher concentration levels, for example, than somebody looking out at a concrete roof. People who had views took less sick leave. The number of calls, this was actually a really interesting one. They noticed that there was an office, large office open plan, and there was a lovely courtyard kind of on one side of it, and the people sitting with a view of the courtyard were handling calls faster than the guys at the back of the space. So what they did was they they shifted everything around and they forked out about £1,000 per person, and they gave everyone a view and realized that everybody's work improved by 60%. They were all handling more calls. And so their ROI, the return on investment, was actually £3,000 per person. So, you know, when you've got figures like these, it's a no-brainer actually in the commercial world. In schools, they've noticed that kids are, there's less absenteeism, they're learning faster, they're getting higher scorecards, all very positive. Studies in schools go back to the 70s. They've been looking at all different types of lights and color, and natural daylight is key. So, and then this guy, Dr. Qing Li, he's well worth Googling. He is the father of forest medicine in Japan. So he has been studying forest bathing, or Shinrin Yoku, for the last 25, 30 years. And he's observed lower stress levels. If he brought groups into the forest and he measured their cortisol levels and their heart rate and a ton of, you know, empirical measurements. And he discovered that, you know, women, if they spent 2 days in the forest, their cortisol levels dropped by 75%. Now, cortisol is the hormone that triggers our stress reaction. So for stress, we have high levels of cortisol. And cortisol can actually put a belly on you as well. So there's a lot of positive reasons for getting rid of cortisol in our lives. Men didn't respond as well, but, you know, hey, 35% isn't bad after 2 days. Interestingly enough, he replicated his studies in the forest in hotels, and he put 2 groups of people in the hotels, and he measured their basic statistics. And he used essential oils that he had made from the trees in the forest, the local forests. And he actually found he got similar, not the same, but similar results. There were reductions, but not quite as strong. So the evidence is compelling as to why we should be using biophilic design in interiors. So what happened was then, this is the 14 patterns of biophilic design, and this was produced by Terrapin Bright Green in 2014. And these guys are a leading sustainability consulting firm in the States, and they have a huge R&D department, and they collated and analyzed all the findings of numerous studies like the ones we've just been looking at. And based upon their findings, they developed a blueprint for designers using 14 patterns that they identified as being beneficial when being incorporated into architecture and interior design. And so we're going to look at those 14 patterns, and then we're going to look at them in actual case studies. So they are split into 3 sections. They're split into what's called nature in the space, which this refers to the incorporation of plants and water and air and animals in the built environment. Then there's another section, which is natural analogs. These are one step away from nature. There are materials and patterns that evoke nature. And then we have nature of the space. And this refers to the way that we respond psychologically and physiologically to different spatial configurations. So if we look at nature in the space, there are 7 patterns 1 to 7. And the first pattern is visual connection with nature. In other words, this is about seeing nature whilst indoors. So examples are orientating a room to benefit from a view of nature, or hanging artwork, or using video depicting nature scenes, or using lots of house plans. NASA, for example, recommends 1 per square meter. You can install an aquarium or a green wall. The well building standard, we have to do 1% of the floor area must be potted plants or potted beds, or we have to have a green wall, which has to be 2% of the size of the floor area, or it has to be on the largest available wall. So then our second pattern is a non-visual connection with nature. And this pattern is about stimulating our other 5 senses. So example, smell, sound, touch, hear, and taste. And examples for this, we're using textured materials, stone and brick, and wood and fur, and natural fabrics, using essential oil diffusers like Dr. Qing Li, father of forest medicine, he'd recommend pine oils, listening to natural soundtracks like Spotify. He's got a ton of forest sounds, babbling water. Gardening and horticultural space. This is amazing. They've discovered that horticultural therapy has a massive impact on those suffering from dementia. And so you'll see in certainly Scandinavian countries, they are using horticultural therapy in many of their retirement or their care homes. And they're bringing people out of themselves. Like it's a whole other science. It's something to look into. It's wonderful. Other things, nature in the space could be about domesticated animals or pets to bring your dog to work. Crackling fires, you know, real or images, all of these things about putting, you know, the non-visual connection to nature. All our other senses are being stimulated. And then the third pattern is non-rhythmic sensory stimuli. And this pattern's about creating random movement. So in nature, we'd hear random bird songs or breezes, or there'd be water babbling, or there's insects flying around. And this pattern actually can produce some of the strongest biophilic responses. And examples of this are, billowy fabric or screen materials that move or glisten with light or breeze, and reflections of water on a surface, or shadows, or dapple light that change with movement or time, or nature sounds being broadcasted at unpredictable intervals. It's all, it's non-rhythmical, so it has to be unpredictable. You can have mechanically released plant oils, kinetic art, hanging mobiles. And the fourth pattern then is thermal and airflow variability. So this is about creating a natural draft by bringing in fresh air and ensuring cross ventilation if possible. This also allows people to have an individual control to adjust the heating. In the well building standard, we allow a thermal gradient of 3 degrees in offices, so that people have free address to move to an area that's either hotter or cooler, whatever suits them or what they're wearing that day. It's very important that we have opening and closing window shades for, to manage the heat coming through, the solar gain. And using another way of doing this is using a mixture of building materials that would absorb or emit the heat from the sun at different rates. So the fifth pattern is the presence of water. And it's not always easy to install a water feature within earshot. So artwork and digital sounds are great replicators for this pattern. However, on a well project for every 100,000 feet, we must include a water feature, and it has to be 1.8 meters high, or it has to be 4 meters squared. But other things you can install can be an aquarium, water wall, fountain I mentioned, or you could create reflections of water, real or simulated onto the surfaces, or you can use imagery with water. And then the sixth pattern is dynamic and diffused light. So you may already be familiar with circadian lighting. This is huge in contemporary office design. This is a system that's designed to emit a white or blue light during the morning, replicating the type of sunlight we have at this time, and slowly changing to warmer tones in the late afternoons. This ties in with our circadian rhythms, which are triggered by our ganglion cells in our eyes, and they release the correct hormones. Whether it's morning, we get cortisol to get us up and get us working for the day. And in the evenings, then the warmer light triggers the production of melatonin, which tells us it's really getting time to kind of slow down and go to sleep. When these get disrupted, you have people suffering from chronic sleep problems. With chronic sleep problems, you can have people, you can put on weight, you can have stress, you're not at your best performance. So keeping our circadian rhythm in check is actually really, really important. Other examples of dynamic and diffuse light can be providing daylight from multiple angles. So windows or skylights or clerestory windows or roof lights. So for example, tall windows, clerestory windows, they throw light deeper into a room. So we benefit from sunlight, like natural daylight, for longer. Skylights give us 30% more light than windows on a vertical plane. So playing around with light and all the various ways we can get it into spaces is really important. We can layer light sources to complement our natural daylight. So using numerous lighting sources together actually gives us a really vibrant lighting design. You might use ambient diffuse lighting on the walls and the ceilings. You might link that up with task lighting at desks in an office environment, and accent lighting then to give some visual interest. We would also look at individual control. So it's important for dynamic and diffuse light that people have control over this as well, so they can control glare. If there's too much light coming in natural light in a window, you may want to dim lights for some reason, or again, it's a balancing act with how much daylight we have. And then we have pattern number 7 is connection with natural systems. So this is about an appreciation of natural change. So example, the changing seasons, the time of the day, different weather conditions, and so on. So for this pattern, you might use natural patterns from geology, like fossils or crystals. You might use things with natural life cycles, like houseplants, that they bloom at a certain time of the year, and they die, hopefully not, but so they have a full life cycle. You'd also use materials that naturally patinate. So leather, stone, wood, copper, bronze. A view to the outside is also good here. If you can harness the sounds you know, of rain, for example, or a view of rainwater. You might use a rain chain, you know, you get the noise, you get the visual. So there are the first 7 patterns. Now, the biophilic health responses to nature in the space of the first 7 patterns are, as you can see here, reduced stress, reduced heart rate, lower blood pressure, increased well-being and productivity. In fact, workplace studies on projects that have undergone biophilic refurbishment have reported a 15% higher level of well-being than those in environments devoid of nature, 6% higher level of productivity, and a 15% higher level of creativity. Now, this has a huge impact on the bottom line of any business. And if you take the running costs of an average office building, it's generally broken down to, you know, that you pay about 0.8% is your energy bill, 8.9% is your rent or your mortgage, and 90.3% is your people cost. Now, that's huge. So if you can achieve 6% increased productivity out of your 90.3% overhead, I mean, it's really is a no-brainer. And in fact, there was a study done in the UK in 2020 it's called the Franklin study, and they reported that for every £1 that was spent on supporting mental health, employers were getting back £5 on their investment in reduced presenteeism, absenteeism, and staff turnover. So there's a massive economic argument for using biophilic design in the workplace. So we have the natural analogs. So these are one step away from nature, and they are materials, you know, they're materials and patterns that evoke nature. So biomorphic patterns and shapes, these occur naturally in nature, such as the Fibonacci sequence. This is a numeric sequence found in the number of petals in a flower or in the pines of a cone, and it goes 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. So it's made up of the 2 numbers beforehand. 2, 3 is 5. 3 and 5 is 8, and so on. And you might employ a Fibonacci sequence to inform the detail of wall paneling or the design of a balustrade, or you might use it to determine what pattern and fabric you might use. Natural organic fractals are patterns that repeat qualities at different scales. So branches, bark, waves, fire, ferns, wood grains. And there's also what's it called? There's types of fractals that computers can generate as well, you know, so it's an algorithm, but we don't respond, humans don't respond as well to a computer generated fractal as to a natural fractal. So we can use fractals to introduce greater complexity to maybe a minimalist space. They could be part of the lighting and the shadow design, for example, or it could be about adding texture to a certain wall or pattern. And actually, there's a nice, you see this picture here. This is of the Westin Hotel. They did this light feature, which replicated the canopy of a tree. And this is a fractal, and it covers all the other things. It's got the dapple light effect, and it was a great, very clever use of it. So other ways then that you can bring biomorphic forms or patterns, you might use them on carpets, fabrics, wallpapers, tiles, tiling layouts. If you look at Victor Horter's Tassel Hotel here, this was done in 1893. You can see he used an awful lot of biomorphic patterns here, and his mosaic is beautiful and sinewy and organic, and so are his balustrades. Gaudi, another guy, you might have come across the architect Gaudi in Barcelona. His buildings are glorious examples of organic architecture and interiors. So other things we could use are columns shaped like trees. In fact, you have here Santiago, a Spanish architect, did this building in Toronto within the 90s, but you can see that the columns are designed like the fronds of a fern leaf. You could also use acoustic paneling, like for walls and ceiling, like baffles. I don't know if you know baffles, and you can shape them the way they come down off the ceiling, or you can use fabrics. And sounds can be fractal, even a fractal sound. So waves lapping or crashing. That's another way of bringing natural analog of fractals into an interior. So the next pattern is the 9th pattern, which is the material connection with nature. And this is all about using a variety of natural materials and textiles. So it's kind of self-explanatory. And this image here is of the Bank of America in New York. And this was done by, it was a Cook Fox Architects. And this is leather clad, which is soft to the touch, but it's got patina and it's calming. Now, what's interesting about the effects of this particular pattern of pattern number 9, material connection with nature, is that studies have shown that the effects of this pattern can be quite significant. So for example, if a room is finished in 75% of wood, it positively impacts on our endocrine system and our cortisol levels drop. So it would be a great treatment if you were designing a dentist's waiting room, for example, so that people are nice and calm before they go in and see the dentist. It probably wouldn't be the best solution to be doing an office fit out, where you're expecting people to perform and to be alive and awake, and so on. So other materials we might look at for here, all natural wood grains, linen, stone, fossil, bamboo, rattan, dried grasses. You'd use a natural color palette, particularly greens. Greens have been shown to really encourage creativity. You might look at how you're constructing your walls or your finishes on your walls. You might use wood or brick or stone or clay plaster or textured papers, textured paints. So the 10th pattern, complexity and order. This involves recreating natural spatial hierarchies and adding sensory layers. In other words, it's don't be bland, okay? You can create order, but we add layers to it. So in the Calatrava Albert Lambert Galleria here in the atrium, he has, he's got the perfect ratio between the length of the stalk and the frond of the fern. But he's also got it's vibrant, it's interesting. He's layered, the dapple light. But he's also got order in where he's located all his columns. So it's kind of a balancing act. It's quite a hard one to describe. You almost will see it, recognize when you see it. But usually we'd be layering textures and materials. It doesn't have to be fussy. You can choose a ton of materials all in a similar colorway, but they all have different textures. And that gives you that sort of sensory depth that you're looking for, but it's not going to be too much. On the floor plan, you might focus on a natural hierarchy, that you might have one major focal point and everything else supports that, or you might have 2 or 3. You might use a Fibonacci sequence here and go, well, actually 3, 5, 8, 3 big things, 5 smaller things, and 8 really, really, small things. That's how the Fibonacci sequence would come in here. And you might look at structural elements in that ceiling heights or columns. You might expose structure like timber beams. You might expose the mechanical systems, your HVAC, which is another way. It's like exposing the skeleton of a building, which could, which we see kind of in nature as well. And in this case, if you're using for this pattern, plant selection, it's all about diversity and where you're going to place and locate the plants in the space. So, so what's not to love here? I mean, you look at these biophilic, these health responses. I mean, they're so positive. What's interesting, just I didn't mention the previous slide about fractals, actually, is it appears that their appeal to human is innate and it's not learned. So in nature, every structure is a fractal of sorts, but the built urban environments that we inhabit are all about straight lines and right angles and empty planes and cubes. I mean, this is how we build. And this fails to adequately nurture and revitalize us. And humans have evolved what's called a fractal fluency. It's a bit like a language fluency. And this is the ability to detect and understand fractal patterns really easily and accurately without needing, huge brain power. And we perceive fractal environments as being really beautiful. And they also have quantifiable health benefits. Stress reduction has been recorded by up to 60% in a fractal environment. And they've also spotted that, people have improved cognitive performance, creativity, problem solving, and their mood has improved in a beautifully designed fractal environment. Now, too fussy is stressful. So there's a narrow line and you don't want to cross. So add your fractals or your details sort of slowly. Build it, as I say, build it in layers. So we have now the final one is nature of space, and these are the last 4 patterns. And this refers to the way that humans respond psychologically and physiologically to different spatial configurations. So we have an innate preference for open spaces, and because they provide, broad vistas for surveillance and safety. And in fact, some physiological studies have shown that our bodies react most positively to savanna-like settings, low grass, clusters of shade trees, and expansive views. So the first pattern prospect focuses on having unimpeded views over distance, ideally at a minimum 6 meters, but ideally over 30 meters is good. And this makes us feel safe because we can see what's going on around us. And it also rests our eyes. It reduces eye strain and fatigue. So you know, you're looking away from your computer screen with a good view at the window and go back to your computer screen, you're getting a little bit of rejuvenation. So the ways we might provide for prospect is having a view, as mentioned, over nature. We might be able to see a piece of art at the end of a long corridor. The ability of being able to see from one space into another space is really good. You can use artwork with depth, interesting photographs, and quite a funky one is using stairwells and elevators on the, you know, on the building perimeter. So having glass on the outside and glass on the inside, and you go up and down, that you have these incredible views, but you also feel safe. You know, you have the benefit of being able to see what's coming at you. Very fight or flight. So refuge is about creating a safe haven, which is stress-free and restorative. And it's about providing protection overhead and on one's back, and preferably on around 3 sides. And this can be done by including a high back chair, a reading nook, a drop ceiling, using baffles or suspended fabrics, or even by simply lowering the lighting levels. That works really effectively too. And in the commercial settings, you know, you'd want to provide a variety of these. You'd be providing telephone pods, sleeping pods, believe it or not, meeting rooms with 3 walls, booth seating, covered walkways. There's a number of different ways we'd incorporate this pattern. Mystery is a kind of a nice little one. It entices with the promise of more, and it creates a feeling of, you know, anticipation, and it kind of compels you to investigate further. And it can be really creative with dramatic shadows using spotlights or translucent materials at windows or doors that kind of hint to what's going on behind. Curved edges are actually much better than sharp edges for mystery, because they slowly reveal as you walk around what's kind of happening around the corner, and it draws you through the space. There's things called peekaboo windows. The Japanese use these a lot, that kind of give you a hint of a view of what might be going on. They might partially just show you a little bit of an arm or something of a statue, and you have to kind of walk around to see the rest of it. And then finally, risk and peril is a really odd one, but it's great. It's about giving an experience of risk or danger, whilst ultimately knowing that you're safe. So what this is about is the right amount of danger can heighten our dopamine levels, which lead to increased motivation, memory, and problem-solving skills. So for examples of this would be a double height atrium with a balcony or a catwalk, you know, like up here, you know, in the Google building. Infinity edges, or passing under or over or through water, you know, the stepping stones through kind of a water feature, or life-size photography with predatory or dangerous animals. You often see, you know, vast shark mouth coming at you. So these all help to you know, to improve our time in these spaces. So funny enough, the nature of the space and physiological responses are really interesting. Reduce boredom. I mean, you know, that's pretty impressive. So there are the 14 patterns of Terrapin Green, and they're a great resource to refer to. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at 3 case studies, one in hospitality, one in workspace, and one in residential, and show you how the patterns have been used in each project. So I'm sorry if I'm flying along, but I know we're on a time thing here. Right, so this is the Nam An Retreat in Da Nang, Vietnam. And over here, you have this beautiful courtyard. So nature in the space, so I'm going to break it into the 3 sections. So nature in the space, which is, if you remember, it's about the incorporation of plants or water or air and animals into the built environment. And so this is situated in nature. And there's a courtyard with a hanging garden, there's water, there's planting. And these cover the patterns of visual connection with nature, connection with natural systems, diffuse light variability, thermal and airflow variability, non-rhythmical stimuli, and the stepping stones over the body of water satisfy 2 patterns, the presence of water and risk peril. You've got natural sounds and smells, these are your non-visual connection, and you've got the dapple light, natural movement, breeze coming through the courtyard. So means you can see the time of the day, it'll affect your circadian rhythms, it's non-rhythmic sensory stimuli, and it's dynamic and diffuse light. So there's a ton of in the nature in the space. In natural analogs, you've got calming colors throughout this. There's natural local materials. Biophilia is very much about using local. Okay, that's really important. It should, you know, there's a lot more. You also want to support your local environment, but bringing in local materials is sort of key to some of this, but mixing them. We've got layering of materials. We've got layering of lighting. You see the ceiling height. You can see the exposed columns here. They've got some biophilic treatment on those. but there's also balance and symmetry as to where they're located in the space. We have, what else do we have in here? Yeah, that'll probably cover about that. And nature of the space, then we've got open views, like open views you see around here, all around here. So you've got prospect, you've got your ambient lighting and tucked away seating, maybe down here, refuge, and you've got exterior shading and your panels and your plants, which are partially obscuring views, so they're a bit of mystery. And then, so this is, if you want to take a screenshot, there are each of the images we've just been through with suggestions of what or how the biophilic design implementations have been used. So the next one, next case study is workplace. So this is Google in Dublin at the bottom here. And the two top pictures are indeed in Tokyo. So these are two really different cultures, but similar biophilic interventions. So we have looking at nature in the space. So remember, bringing nature inside. We've got indoor planters, we've got moss, we've got pebbles, we've got trees. That gives our visual connection. We most likely they'll be playing natural soundtracks. Maybe they'll even have scents. These would kind of be your non-visual connection. We've got lots of different textured fabrics and finishes, which are tactile, again, non-visual connection. They're highly likely, I mean, if they didn't have it, it would be mental. They'll have a circadian lighting system in there. That's your dynamic and your diffuse lighting pattern sorted. And then if we look at natural analogs, so these are, things that are, that evoke nature. We've got the, you can see the organic, the curved furniture, the reception desk, the undulated detailings, really biomorphic. You got a mixture of natural materials. We're creating sensory layers, we're adding complexity. And we can see the skeleton of the building here in the Google. And we've got exposed ducting, you see it there. And we got some baffles, kind of baffle design here, which looks like bamboo, which is very local Japanese culture. So these are very thoughtful ideas they've used. And then finally, the nature of the space. And this refers to, how we respond physiologically to the different spatial configurations. And down, so the Google building has views out over the water, over the canal there. So it's got presence of water, it's got prospect, it's got visual connection. Outside, they've got quiet spaces, they've got high back seating, quiet booths, concentration zones. So this provides refuge. And then you have these these decals on the glass which obscure the views, and we've got diffused glazing here, and this all adds to mystery. So again, we have each of these images and the list of what you will find in each case. And then the third study is the residential study here. This is a rendering actually of an imaginary forest home, cantilevered over a river. It's called Casa Atibaia, and it's modeled on Brazilian modernism, created by two French visual artists, Charlotte Taylor and Nicolas Priaulx. And it's wonderful, we inspired to this, and maybe this is where we're going with building. And so in this case, we're looking at nature in the space. Again, look at the greenery, the hanging pots, the floor plants. You've got the large glass walls, the natural light, the views of the river below. That gives us visual connection to nature, connection with natural systems. There's natural sounds. So you've got non-visual connection. The furniture is natural textured materials. It's soft, it's rounded, it's zoned on the ground, with textured rugs and floor finishes. These are all non-visual connection. You can feel it on your feet when you've moved from zone to zone. There's opening windows, which allows for breeze, allows for change in temperature. There's your thermal and your airflow variability. And the surfaces are designed to absorb and reflect heat as well. So your thermal and airflow variability are resolved. So white is cool, and then the stone or the rock would absorb the heat and release it later on in the evening, kind of slowly, like a storage heater. And then if we look at the natural analogs, so these are, how they're replicating nature. We've got organic shaped furniture, and the kitchen up here is all curved. It's really biomorphic. You've got the undulating glass. It's like being underwater. And the layout of the spaces. This house is built completely on a curve. So you're always walking in curved paths and zones, very biomorphic. It also lets us bring in a little bit of mystery into the building. The landscape around it, the local landscape supports the structure, the rocks. So, the rocks are holding it up. And the natural local materials and the furniture and the finishes gives us, the material connection that we're looking for. We have complexity with the mixtures of materials. They've got rough, hard, soft. You've got grasses. You've got, again, a really strong a strong mix of beautifully textured and natural materials. And then you've got the ceiling heights are nice and high, and vertical columns and the natural rock create, or the natural rock columns create, the order as to where they are located in the space. And then finally, you have the nature of the space. So how do people react to this? Well, you've elevated platforms and views over distance, you've prospect covered. You've quiet spaces, so you've curtains creating private space around the bed and in the living room area, so you've got refuge. There's curved walkways and obscured views, so you've got mystery cover there, and it cantilevers over the river, so you've got risk and peril. So, and again, if you want to do a screenshot, you can with photographs. So that's everything we're going to do on biophilic design. So to recap, biophilic designed environments have been shown to positively impact on our health, showing reduced stress levels, reduced heart rates, and they impact on increased well-being, reported feeling of contentment of being around 15%, increased productivity by 6%, increased creativity by 15%, and decreased boredom, which is good. Okay, so whilst biophilic design is a really positive tool, right, we also need to understand that there's a negative impact on the built environment. So we're going to look at some well-known toxins and their health impacts, and what we need to consider to minimize potential harm in terms of the materials that we're going to be specifying. So we breathe 15,000 liters of air in every day, okay? So volatile organic compounds, I'm sure you've all heard of them, are commonly found in, wet applied materials like paints and coatings, and they're in composite wood products via formaldehyde, which is in the glues. And long-term exposure can cause chronic respiratory diseases, lung cancer, heart disease, and so on. And what happens is the chemicals change into a gas and get released into the air when the space warms up. So you finish your project, you turn on the heating, and boom, you're whacking out VOCs. And they can be released for up to about 5 years. However, a Japanese study I was reading recently thinks they can be released up for 15 years. Now, the scary thing about this is children are most at risk from exposure to toxins. So there's a thing called the first 1,000 days. Don't know if you've heard about this, but basically from a baby in utero to just under 2 years of age, apparently what happens to them during this time will impact on their health for the rest of their lives. So if a mother, when she's pregnant, is exposed to too many toxins in either a workspace or whatever, it may affect, her child's health in the future. But when the kids are crawling around on the floor, this is where they come in contact with settling toxins, and when the gases drop, so actually they're fully exposed to these toxins in a way that, and their metabolism isn't as developed as ours. So they really, they really take it, absorb it in, and it greatly increases their risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and get this, obesity. So there are endocrine disruptors in the VOCs. And some of them are PFCs and phthalates, and they actually create a type of it's a chemical that affects our endocrine levels. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about more of that. By the way, professional decorators are 40% more likely to contract lung cancer, according to the WHO. Now, things are obviously improving because there's an awareness of VOCs, but remember, we're on site too. And we can spend a lot of time on site. So it isn't just people out there who can be affected. It's the people you're designing for, but it's also the people who are working in these spaces. So that's really important to consider. So as I mentioned earlier on, obesity, right? So obesity, there's some endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that interfere with our body's hormone system, have been shown to be called what are called obesogens. And these chemicals increase the risk of obesity by disrupting our metabolism. And they're in Teflon and stain protectors, and they're in flame retardants. Now in Ireland, we have to use flame retardants, which is a pain in the neck. So we have to be looking at balancing our VOC levels in our interiors. What else? They're in phthalates. These are chemicals that they're phthalates. Oh yeah, they're the plasticizers. They make plastic. They used in plastic to make it more transparent or flexible and durable. In fact, they're found in everything: toys, flooring, wall coverings, nail polish, perfumes, food packaging, detergents. So obesity, who knew? Infertility, and this is really tragic. So infertility, there's some endocrine disruptors that are linked to reduced fertility in men and women. And BPA, think of, bottles, that we drink our water out of. They're hard plastics, phthalates, the soft plastics. And I mean, these are called everywhere chemicals because they are so common. They are literally everywhere. And what happens is the molecules in the plastic degrades and releases chemicals as they age or in water or in sunlight. So you know the way you never leave your bottle of water in your car and let the sunlight hit, and then you just don't drink the water. That's why. So it gets into our systems and it mimics our body's hormones, and then can potentially cause adverse reproductive issues or developmental issues, and neurological, immune effects. You know, the list goes on. Cancer, I mean, we all know of carcinogens. So one of the leading causes of premature mortality globally is cancer. And carcinogens such as formaldehyde, PFCs, heavy metals, they're all around us. There is a ton of formaldehyde in plywood, and we use it as one of our key building materials. It's in the glue. MDF, full of it. So you can specify low or no formaldehyde products, but again, this is a balancing act because can you afford to? What's your budget like? And heavy metals, you know, they're in, think of lead pipes that we all use to our water supply. Now, apparently in Ireland, I don't know about any other countries, but I was reading the other day, we don't have any lead pipes left in our system, but they can be in the houses that if a house hasn't been upgraded since the 1970s, the actual internal supply can still have lead pipes in it. So, you know, it is definitely something we really need to consider. Lead is lethal. I mean, it's so much damage to brains. It's not even funny. Premature births, I mean, tragic. This can be linked to exposure to air pollutants during pregnancy, as mentioned before. So your indoor contaminants, so your VOCs, your formaldehydes. Formaldehydes in furniture, flooring, glues, adhesives, pressed wood products, as I mentioned, you know, chipboard, plywood, MDF, insulation. Another nasty old one is called benzene that we get in our air, and that's in lubricants and rubbers. It's in dyes, detergents, nylon, synthetic fabrics, and so on. So, what can we do? What can we do about this? Well, it is kind of all about balance. As I mentioned before, you have to be realistic with materials and budget and application. So, you know, you have to think about how necessary is it really to have the optimum IAQ, interior air quality. So, for example, if you were designing a residential care home, yes, absolutely. Or you're designing a hospital, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is promoting healing. Let's not get in the way of healing. If you were trying to design, I don't know, a car cleaning facility, probably not. They're using tons of chemicals as it is to clean the car. So, I mean, it's a balancing act. You will find if in the residential market, some people are very interested in this and will actually want to pay the extra, you know, the extra for the formaldehyde-free maybe products and the low VOC. Well, low VOC is fairly standard now. And you will find there are some people who really don't, you know, they really don't give a toss about this, but they should. And I think we as designers, as I said at the very beginning of this, we have a responsibility to design environments that are safe. And we have to protect children because they're very vulnerable and they're the ones who are going to carry the weight of this. Because as we continue to put this in their systems over the years, we don't know how bad it's going to be when they're older. So we have to look at paints and coatings. You should be selecting low VOC. This is under 30 grams per liter, or you can go for, you know, no VOC. I mean, most interior paints are low VOC now. VOC free is under 5 grams per liter. These are normally sort of powder based, like a natural lime paint. Graftonstone, for example, they have other claims. They claim that actually 3 of their 15-liter buckets of their paint absorb more than 10 kilograms of CO2. And that's about the same amount as an adult tree weighing 250 kilograms in a year. Dulux also have a sort of a natural product called Forest Breathe BioCare. It's not in Ireland, but they have launched it in China. And this is an interior emulsion with air purifying technology that claims to enhance air quality and purifies harmful air pollutants. There's also some new plasterboards on the market that there's a chemical reaction that they suck in all the VOCs and they trap them in their construction. So there's a huge amount of innovation going on, which is wonderful. There's also products you can buy that claim that they can seal in the VOCs, and products called Safecoat or Zinsser, which is quite a, probably all know Zinsser. So if you have a product and it stinks, you can normally smell it. It's that horrible toxic smell a lot of the time. Seal it. Flooring, as I think I mentioned before, some engineered wood flooring products can have high VOC levels. So if you're using engineered floorboards, you know, you're going to have glue in between those levels. So check the label. Some of them are doing great steps forward. They will have, you know, green labels of sorts, and they'll be mentioned, or you can talk to the suppliers as to what are their lowest VOC products. Formaldehyde has this kind of an E rating. This is the standard rating in Europe. And in the US, actually, they use what's called the CARB rating. It's Californian Air Resource Board. They're both fairly similar. If you come across them, CARB or E, E1 is the acceptable standard for formaldehyde emissions. It's about 0.10 parts per million, 0.10. Carpets. So carpets can bring in dust mites, which can trigger allergies. Latex can emit styrene. And so actually minimizing carpet use upstairs is not a bad policy if you're doing residential work. Furniture, and carpets will also have, some of them will have green label standards. You know, they'll have minimized any of the nasty sort of stuff that's going on. It's all in the glues really, and how they're installed. Furniture and furnishings, I mentioned before, unfortunately, flame retardant treatments are something we're going to have to deal with. But you could look at reconditioned or vintage or upcycle products, you know, to balance it all out. There's a whole vibe going on with that. Look, at the moment, mix and match, really nice. Adhesives and sealants, I mentioned with formaldehyde, and we could use coatings to seal in the VOCs. Air, wood burning. Ugh, yucky VOCs come out of burning timber. And on a large scale from incinerators, they you know, they're releasing what's called dioxins, and actually on the small scale as well. And dioxins are really, really nasty, and they get into the air and they get into our food chain. They kind of get into the fatty bit. So if you're eating a steak, cut off the fatty bit. And these dioxins can cause some really nasty reproductive and developmental problems. They can do a lot of damage to the immune system. They can interfere with hormones, and they can cause cancer. So using plants to purify the air is, you know, a kind of good balancing act. NASA were the first people who did a huge study on the 50 plants that are best for clearing our air. It's worth having a look at that. As I mentioned before, 1 plant per meter is a good rule of thumb. I mean, I have probably about 40 or 50 plants in my living room, and it's all different sizes and shapes, and but it's great. And then finally, open the windows. Use plants to clean the air. So that, I think, brings us to the end. It does. It brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'm sorry it took so long. Here are my contact numbers. So do reach out to me if you need me. And I would like to open the floor now to you if you have any questions.